My name's Lauren. I'm 42, and I've spent almost half my life working as a nurse at a small hospital tucked in the northern corner of Maine. The kind of town where people still wave at passing cars and gossip travels faster than the snow plows. I moved here right after nursing school, married a firefighter, and thought that counted as building a life. For a while, it did. Mark and I have been together 15 years. He's steady, quiet, the kind of man who fixes things before you ask. Faucets, fences, feelings, if you give him a chance. We bought a one-story house outside town with a porch we swore we'd rebuild every summer. The porch is still crooked. Somewhere between night shifts, overtime, and the 1,000 small chores that make up married life, our conversations thinned out. Nothing dramatic, no slammed doors or shouting, just a slow fade. You wake up one day and realize you're polite roommates who share a mortgage. At work, the rhythm never changes. The ER lights are too bright, the coffee too bitter. Patients come in steady waves. A fall on the ice, a kid with the flu, someone's uncle with chest pains. We patch, comfort, chart, and move on. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And for years, I told myself that was enough, that stability meant happiness, or close enough to pass for it. It was a Tuesday night in late November when the shift turned long and the roads outside turned slick. The radio crackled. Single car accident on Route 11, driver conscious, possible fracture. 10 minutes later, the doors burst open and the EMTs rolled in, a man covered in slush and smelling faintly of gasoline. Early 30s, strong build, face too relaxed for the pain he must have felt. "Name's Nick," he said when I asked, trying to grin despite the swelling near his shoulder. "I think I lost the fight with my steering wheel." His humor caught me off guard. Most people that night just groaned or cursed. I cleaned a cut along his cheek, the kind that would fade into a faint white line by spring. He watched my hands, not in the usual way some men do, but like he was trying to memorize the calm. The X-ray confirmed a minor fracture. Sling, rest, painkillers, follow-up. Routine. Still, he thanked me like I'd done more than tape him up. "Appreciate it, Lauren," he said, reading my badge correctly the first time. That almost never happens. When he left, the ER went back to normal. Machines beeping, doors sliding, fluorescent hum. But I kept thinking about how easily he smiled through it, how his eyes stayed clear despite the pain. The next morning, Mark sat at the kitchen table checking his pager. "Storm coming," he said, pouring coffee into his thermos. "I'll probably get called in tonight." I nodded, spreading butter on toast that had already gone cold. We kissed out of habit, the kind that feels like closing a door softly. That should have been the end of it. Another patient, another night. But a week later, during my lunch break, the front desk clerk waved me over. "Guy here to see you," she said, half teasing. And there was Nick, sling still on, holding a paper bag that smelled like coffee and sugar. "Don't worry," he said, raising his free hand. "I'm not hurt again. Just came to say thanks." He left the donuts for the staff, but he stayed just long enough to ask how work was going, if the snow had hit hard up my way, if I ever got a real lunch break. Simple things, harmless things. When my shift ended that night, I drove home past quiet houses and lit windows, thinking about nothing and everything. Mark was already asleep on the couch, TV flickering. I stood there a moment longer than usual before turning off the light. Everything looked normal, and maybe that was the strangest part of all. A week later, Nick started showing up more often, never in a way that crossed a line, at least not at first. Sometimes he'd stop by the hospital lobby with a coffee he claimed was extra. Other times I'd see his truck outside when my shift ended, engine running, lights cutting through the snow. He'd offer me a ride home, and I'd pretend to hesitate before saying yes. It felt simple, like a favor between two people who happened to get along. Mark worked nights most of that month. Between fire calls and overtime, he was gone more than home. We left notes on the counter. Dinner in the fridge. Stay safe. Don't forget to salt the driveway. It was functional communication, the kind that keeps a house running but doesn't keep a marriage alive. When Nick offered me a lift, it wasn't rebellion. It was just easier than another silent drive through town. One evening, after a 12-hour shift, he asked if I wanted to stop by his garage. Nothing fancy, he said. Just need an extra pair of hands with an old boat I'm trying to fix. I told myself it was fine. I'd helped friends before. Besides, it wasn't like we were sneaking around. The shop smelled of motor oil and damp wood. A small radio played classic rock, crackling under the sound of wind pressing against the tin roof. The boat sat in the middle, its paint stripped, ribs of old cedar showing through. I held a flashlight while he pried off a rusted hinge. We talked about small things, fishing in summer, the kind of coffee that keeps you awake but not shaky, the way winter makes time feel slower. He laughed when I told him how patients sometimes call me doctor, just because I speak with certainty. You've got that tone, he said, the kind that makes people believe things will be okay. When the work was done, we sat on overturned crates, hands wrapped around paper cups of cheap coffee. Outside, snow started falling again, soft and relentless. He looked at me then, not in the way a man looks when he's trying to impress, but as if he actually saw me, like I wasn't just another person passing through his day. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that until right then. By the time I got home, it was past 10. Mark was in the kitchen, sorting through the mail. You're late, he said without accusation, just observation. Shift ran over, I replied automatically. He nodded, turned back to the pile of envelopes, and said nothing else. I watched him for a second, the curve of his shoulders, the quiet patience in every movement, and waited for guilt to rise. It didn't, not yet. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how easy it had been to lie. Just a sentence, barely a pause. It didn't feel wrong. It felt protective, a small way of keeping something alive inside me that I hadn't felt in years, a spark of being noticed. The next few days blurred together, work, snow, routine. But I caught myself checking the parking lot before every shift, half expecting his truck. And when I didn't see it, something like disappointment settled in. It's strange how fast you can build a habit around someone. You don't plan it, you just start organizing your days by the chance of running into them. And before you know it, that small lie, my shift ran over, becomes part of the script. I told myself it was harmless. After all, nothing had happened. Not really. But deep down, I think I already knew that harmless things have a way of turning into something else when you stop being honest, especially with yourself. It was a Friday afternoon when I stopped by Nick's garage without warning. I'd finished an early shift, still in my scrubs, hair tied up, half tired but restless. I told myself I just wanted to return the travel mug he'd left in my car a week earlier. It wasn't a plan, more like an impulse, the kind that feels harmless until it isn't. The garage door was open, country radio humming low from an old speaker. Nick stood near the boat, shirtless, paint streaked across his shoulder and neck. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "You're early," he said, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world that I'd show up. "I was in the neighborhood," I lied. The truth was, I'd driven 20 minutes out of my way. He wiped his hands on a rag, leaving faint blue smudges across his ribs. You want a beer? I'm on the clock for another 2 hours, I said. Technically. He shrugged, handed me a soda instead, and turned back to the boat. For a while, we just worked side by side, me sanding a rail, him tightening bolts with his good arm. The air smelled of oil, wood dust, and early spring thaw. When he finally looked at me, it wasn't playful like before. You don't talk much about home, he said. There's not much to say. 15 years, he said, as if testing the weight of the number. That's a long time. I nodded, focusing on the sandpaper in my hand. Long doesn't always mean good. He didn't push for details. Maybe he didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It just existed, like we'd both run out of polite words and decided not to pretend anymore. Then he reached over, brushed a smear of paint off my cheek with his thumb. It was a small gesture, almost clumsy, but it felt like crossing a border that had been invisible until that moment. I didn't move. It happened quietly. No build-up, no dramatic pause. Just a kiss that felt like stepping into something I didn't understand yet. It wasn't sweet or desperate. It was real. And when it ended, I stepped back fast, heart pounding hard enough to feel reckless. I shouldn't have, I started. I know, he said, me neither. I drove home before the sun dipped behind the trees. My hands were shaking on the wheel, not from guilt, not exactly, but from the sharpness of being awake again after years of dull edges. When I walked into the house, Mark was in the kitchen, his jacket half zipped. Chief called, he said. Extra shifts this week. The pay's good. That's fine, I said, my voice steady. He nodded, already halfway to the door. You okay? Yeah, I lied again. After he left, I sat at the table staring at the faint paint stain on my sleeve, the color too close to sky to be accidental. The house felt orderly, familiar, every mug in its place, every towel folded the way I liked it. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way Nick had looked at me, like I wasn't part of the furniture of my own life. That night, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the boat, the streak of blue on his neck, the small, irreversible space between before and after. I told myself it was a mistake. One moment. I'd go back to normal tomorrow. But deep down, I already knew. The line was gone, and I was the one who'd erased it. The next few weeks folded into a rhythm I hadn't planned, but didn't resist. I'd tell myself I was running errands after work, or staying late to finish charts, and somehow I'd end up near the garage or down by the old pier. Nick never asked me to come, never made promises, never said anything that sounded like love. Maybe that's why it felt so easy to keep showing up. We met in places that didn't belong to anyone. Parking lots, back roads, the edge of the lake after sunset. Always quiet, always brief. He'd touch my arm in that cautious way, like he was afraid I might vanish if he pushed too far. Sometimes we'd just sit in his truck, radio on low, saying nothing worth remembering, but not wanting the moment to end. At work, I slipped back into my professional skin. Calm, competent, dependable. No one would have guessed there was another version of me driving home after dark, heart beating too fast over something that didn't even have a name. I became an expert at dividing my life into neat halves. The nurse who people trusted, and the woman who had stopped trusting herself. One afternoon, I was helping with intake paperwork when I recognized the last name on the form, Nolan. I looked up, and there she was, Katie, Nick's wife. She had that small-town kindness that disarms you instantly, a warm smile and tired eyes. "Hi," she said. I'm just dropping off some insurance forms for my husband. He said you helped him after the accident. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah, I remember. How's he healing? Better, she said, still smiling. He's too stubborn to rest, of course. Keeps trying to work with one arm, but he's doing okay. She thanked me again, sincerely, like I'd done her a favor that mattered. I handed her a pen she didn't really need, just to avoid looking at her too long. When she left, I stood behind the desk a moment, feeling like the floor had shifted beneath me. That evening, I drove straight to the garage. He was there, wiping his hands on a rag, the air thick with the smell of gas and rain. I saw her today, I said before he could speak. He froze, then nodded. Yeah, she said she stopped by. I can't do this, I said quietly. Not anymore. He took a step closer, the sound of his boots heavy against the concrete. Lauren, listen. No, I interrupted. You don't have to say anything. She looked at me like I was a good person. You understand what that feels like? He ran a hand through his hair, wet from the drizzle outside. I didn't ask for this either, he said. You think I don't feel like hell? But when I'm with you, it's the only time I don't. I shook my head. That's not enough reason to destroy everything. He looked at me for a long time, jaw tight. Then what is? I didn't answer. I turned and walked toward my car, my shoes catching puddles along the cracked pavement. By the time I got in, the rain was coming down hard. I thought that was the end. I told myself I'd made the right choice, that I'd go back to the steady, predictable life I'd built. But the next night, when I got home from a late shift, he was there, standing by my car in the rain, soaked through, eyes fixed on me. He didn't say much, just, I'm not better than you. I just can't go back to what I was before I met you. I wanted to tell him to leave. I wanted to mean it. Instead, I opened the car door and said, Get in before you freeze. As we drove, neither of us spoke. The wipers clicked back and forth, beating time to a choice already made. I didn't know what this was anymore. Love, loneliness, escape. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't ready to let it go. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of day when you expect nothing, so it catches you off guard. Mark showed up at the hospital without warning. I was charting vitals, half-focused, when I saw him standing by the nurse's station in his fire department jacket, snow melting off his boots. Hey, he said. Didn't mean to surprise you. Thought I'd grab lunch together. My heart skipped once, just once, but enough to tell me something inside me already knew what was coming. Before I could answer, Nick turned the corner from the supply room, carrying a box of bandages for maintenance repairs he'd promised to help with. He froze when he saw us. Just a second, maybe two, but that was all it took. Mark's face didn't change much. He just looked at me, then at Nick, then back at me again. Guess you're busy, he said, calm, too calm. I followed him outside, snow crunching under our shoes. Mark, he raised a hand. Don't. Not here. We drove home in silence, the kind that doesn't cool things down but burns slower. In the kitchen, he leaned against the counter, still wearing his jacket. How long? There wasn't any point pretending. A while, I said. He looked down, nodded once. So it's true. Yes. He took a breath, rubbed his jaw, then finally met my eyes. You could have just said you were done, Lauren. You didn't have to disappear while still standing next to me. I didn't plan any of this, I said quietly. It just happened. That's the thing about accidents, he said. They still leave wreckage. There was no shouting, no broken plates, no drama, just two people facing the moment they both stopped being who they used to be. After a long pause, he said, "Maybe for the first time, we're not pretending anymore." He slept in the guest room that night. 2 days later, his things were gone. Uniform shirts missing from the closet, boots from the hallway. He left a note on the counter. "I'll be at my brother's. Don't worry about the mortgage. I'll keep paying my part." The house felt wrong after that. Too clean, too quiet. I kept expecting to hear the creak of his footsteps in the morning, the kettle whistle he always forgot to turn off. But there was only the hum of the fridge and the sound of my own breathing. Nick tried to call once, maybe twice. Then the calls stopped. When I finally drove past his shop a week later, the lights were off, the door locked, a handwritten "closed for repair" sign taped to the window. His phone went straight to voicemail. For the first time in years, I was alone. No shift chatter, no late-night texts, no voice from the other room. Just me, and the echo of everything I'd broken trying to feel alive. At work, people noticed the change. I got quieter, more focused. "You look tired," one nurse said. I smiled and told her I was fine. That word again, fine, the easiest lie of them all. At home, I started cleaning things that didn't need cleaning. Drawers, closets, the pantry. Anything to avoid sitting still. Every trace of Mark and Nick lingered in different corners. A photo from a summer barbecue, a wrench left in the trunk, the faint scent of aftershave that wouldn't wash out of a jacket. One night, I sat on the porch steps with a mug of tea and realized there was no one left to explain myself to. No audience, no judgment, no forgiveness coming. Just the quiet understanding that every escape eventually ends. And sometimes, when the dust settles, you are the only one standing in the ruins. 2 months passed before anything started to feel real again. Winter gave up its grip, and the ice on the roads finally melted into gray slush. I was still living in the house, though most of Mark's things were gone. I told the neighbors he was staying with family while working extra shifts. They nodded politely, pretending not to know more than they did. Small towns are generous that way. They'll talk behind your back, but they won't do it to your face. Mark called sometimes, usually in the evenings when the quiet felt heavier. Never to argue, just to check in. "You doing okay?" he'd ask, his voice steady, distant. "I'm fine," I'd say. He'd pause, maybe to see if I'd offer more. I never did. Once he mentioned he was seeing someone new. "Nothing serious," he added quickly, as if I needed reassurance, but I didn't. I just felt something loosen inside me. Not jealousy, not regret, more like relief. He deserved to feel chosen again. One Saturday, after running errands, I stopped for gas on Route 2. The sun was low, the air smelled like thawed mud and diesel. I stepped out of the car, and there he was, Nick, standing by the next pump, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked different. Hair shorter, face leaner, calmer. Next to him stood a little girl, maybe 4 or 5, holding his hand and kicking at a patch of ice. He saw me before I could look away. For a second, neither of us moved. The girl tugged on his arm, asking something I couldn't hear. He leaned down, said a few words, and she smiled. Then he straightened, eyes meeting mine. No nod, no smile, no anger. Just a quiet recognition. 2 people who had once shared something so consuming it nearly burned their lives down, now standing in daylight with nothing left to hide or fight for. I thought about walking over, saying something polite, something adult. But what was there to say? "I'm sorry" would sound small. "I miss you" would be a lie. So I just watched as he buckled his daughter into the truck, gave a brief wave, and drove off toward town. I sat in my car for a while after that. The pump long since clicked off, Not crying, not even sad, just aware. Aware that whatever we'd been was never meant to last. It wasn't love in the way people hope for. It was a kind of escape for both of us. A way out of the lives we didn't know how to fix. That night, I cleaned out the last of Mark's things. A pair of boots, a box of old photos, a stack of fire department certificates. I packed them carefully, left them by the door. When I looked at the empty closet afterward, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like space, bare, unoccupied, honest. At work the next day, one of the residents joked about how nurses never take vacations. "You all live here," he said. I smiled and told him he wasn't wrong, but I'd already decided something different. On my break, I sat in the staff room scrolling through listings for apartments closer to the coast, small places with ocean air and too much wind. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking for escape. I was looking for a beginning that didn't depend on anyone else. I didn't know where I was heading yet, only that staying meant circling the same ghosts. And I'd had enough of that kind of haunting. By early spring, I'd sold the house. The for sale sign stood in the yard for less than 3 weeks before a young couple with 2 kids and a Labrador made an offer. They walked through the rooms like explorers, talking about where the Christmas tree would go, how they'd repaint the kitchen. I watched them and realized I didn't feel sad, just ready. I rented a small apartment an hour south, closer to the coast. The place had peeling paint and creaky floors, but from the porch you could see the ocean if you leaned far enough over the railing. The air smelled like salt and wood smoke. On my first night there, I sat with a cup of tea and listened to the waves hit the rocks, steady and distant. No sirens, no scanners, no familiar footsteps. Just me. The hospital transferred me to the palliative care unit. Slower pace, heavier conversations. People there don't pretend much. They talk about what they regret, what they wish they'd said, what they're still afraid of. It's strange how comforting honesty can be, even when it comes from people who don't have much time left. I started to understand that truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the thing you stop hiding from. Mark called once more in May. He sounded lighter. "We're good," he said, meaning him and the woman he'd been seeing. "I thought you should know." "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. There was no tension, no leftover heat, just 2 people who had finally stopped pretending to owe each other something. As for Nick, I didn't hear from him again. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about him while driving, a certain song on the radio, the smell of motor oil after rain. But those thoughts passed the way weather does, a brief shift in the air, then gone. I didn't miss him anymore, not really. What I missed was the version of myself who believed being seen could save me. One afternoon, after a long shift, I sat outside the hospice wing, watching the sun drop behind the water. A volunteer was wheeling a patient along the path, and they were laughing about something small and silly. It hit me then how little of life is actually about the big moments. Weddings, heartbreaks, the choices that split things open. Most of it is just showing up, telling the truth when you can, and forgiving yourself when you can't. Sometimes, people think stories like mine end in tragedy or redemption, but the truth is quieter. I'm not broken and I'm not healed. I'm just here, living in a smaller place, working shifts that matter, learning what it means to be honest without waiting for anyone else to give me permission. I still wear my wedding band on a chain around my neck, not because I can't let go, but because it reminds me of who I was, the woman who tried, who failed, who kept going anyway. Not every story gets a second act. Some just settle into the kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. And that's where I've landed. No drama, no excuses. Just the truth, simple and steady. The only thing I have left that's completely mine.